History of Medicine for the year 2024. Please rise for the ceremonial procession. Please remain standing for the national anthem.
Sri Lanka Mata, Apa Sri Lanka, Namo 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 Mata, Sundara Siri Barini, Surandi Ati Somamana Lanka, Raja Nalaya Nekaman Pala Turu Kiri Jaya Bumi Ranga, Apa Hata Sapa Siri Seta Sadhana, Jivana Ye Mata, Dili Kanurana Apa Bhakti Puja, Namo Namo Mata, Apa Sri Lanka, Namo 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 Mata, Upade Apa Vidya, Obamaya Apa Satya, Obade Apa Shanti, Apa Hadatula Bhakti, Apa Alote, Apa Anuprani, Apa Jivana De, Apa Muktiya Obade, Nava Jivana De Nina Apa Kubudukaran Mata, Jnana Bija Vada Vandina Ragina Yanu Mena Jaya Mudikara, Vikramavagade Tanu Kalandadina, Yamu Yamu Vinopama, Prema Vada Samarena Durarala, Namo Namo Mata, Apa Sri Lanka, Namo 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 Mata.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And we will now have the traditional lighting of the oil lamp. For this, I would like to invite President of the Sri Lanka Medical Association, Dr. Ananda Vijay Vikrama, immediate past President, Dr. Vinyarya Ratna, President-elect, Dr. Surantha Pereira, our orator this evening, Dr. Indira Kavita, Honorary Secretary, Dr. Lahiru Kodituakku, Vice President, Professor Hasini Banneheka, Vice President, Dr. Sajid Edrisingha, Honorary Treasurer, Dr. Manilka Suminatilaka, Most Senior Past President, Dr. Lakshman Ranasingha, Past President Representative, Dr. Lushan Jayasuriya, Editors, Professor Senaka Rajapaksa, Professor Atula Sumatipala, representing the Dr. C.G. Uragoda family, Mrs. Dianthi Uragoda. I would also like to call upon the following invitees of the orator, Dr. Sarat Gamini de Silva, Dr. W. K. Balasuriya, Professor Atula Kaluarachi, and Dr. Shriyani Samaravira. Please come forward to light the traditional oil lamp. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Please be seated. I would now like to invite President Sri Lanka Medical Association, Dr. Anand Vijay Vikrama, and our orator this evening, Dr. Indira Kahavita, to the head table. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to the Deshabandu Dr. C.G. Uragoda Memorial Oration on the History of Medicine for the year 2024. I would now like to invite President Sri Lanka Medical Association to introduce the orator, Dr. Indira Kahavita, and to present her with the orator's medal.
Good evening, past presidents, council members, family of Dr. G.C. Uragoda, today's orator, Dr. Indira Kahavita and her family members, ladies and gentlemen. I'm having the pleasant task of introducing today's orator, Dr. Indira Kahavita, which I consider as a privilege and an honor. Though Indira doesn't need any introduction to any medical audience in Sri Lanka, it is customary to do this. Indira Padmapani Kahavita, the firstborn of Mr. Kahavitage Nandadasa and Mrs. Chandravati Padmaperuma, received her education first at Somavira Chandasri Vidyalaya Piliyandala and then at Devi Balika Vidyalaya Colombo, where she excelled in academics and entered the Faculty of Medicine, University of Colombo in 1991. She graduated with second-class honors in 1997, and in addition to academics, she won faculty colors for Karam in 1995 and also designed the cover pages of Sri Lanka Prescriber Journal. After completing the internship at the Disoisa Maternity Hospital and National Hospital of Sri Lanka, she joined the postgraduate program in dermatology in 2001 and had her training under Drs. Mahinda Gunawardena and Ganga Siriman. Indira's interest in leprosy was kindled when she chose leprosy for her MD research. Having passed the MD dermatology examination in 2004, she spent 1 year at London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and she was offered a scholarship to follow the Diploma of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene, and later worked as a clinical research fellow under the eminent leprologist Professor Diana Lockwood, working mostly on leprosy and leishmaniasis. During this period, she participated in several workshops and conferences related to leprosy and authored 2 review articles on leprosy reactions. After returning to Sri Lanka in 2008, she served 4-year stints at District General Hospital Polonnaruwa and Base Hospital Karavanella, establishing the dermatology services as the pioneer dermatologist. Following 4 more years at Base Hospital Homagama, she was posted to the anti-leprosy campaign in 2020. She has been actively involved in leprosy care throughout her career as a dermatologist, both in clinical management and development of disease control strategies. She was an active member in the editorial team of Sri Lanka College of Dermatology Guidelines on Leprosy and was an editor of the book 100 Cases of Leprosy, a joint publication by the Sri Lanka Medical Association and Sri Lanka College of Dermatologists. She has been a speaker at several international conferences, including World Congress of Dermatology in 2023 and many other international forums. And she has authored or contributed to several international publications on leprosy and leishmaniasis and received the National Research Council Merit Award in 2015. Indira has been an active member of several professional organizations, including the Sri Lanka Medical Association, serving as a council member in 2009, 10, and 14. Having served as the secretary to the Sri Lanka College of Dermatologists from 2012 to 2015 and the chairperson of Leprosy Study Group, she served as the president of the Sri Lanka College of Dermatologists from 2019 to 2021. She's an editorial board member of the Nepal Journal of Dermatology, Venereology and Leprology, And she also has been a Sri Lanka College of Dermatology representative to the Borderline Products and Cosmetics Subcommittee of the National Medicines Regulatory Authority. At present, she is involved in several international research collaborations in clinical management of leprosy. She is the first Sri Lankan to be appointed as a member of the WHO Technical Advisory Group on Leprosy since 2022 and is the contributor for the WHO Technical Guidance on Leprosy Management of Adverse Drug Reactions to Drugs Used in Treatment of Leprosy in 2024. She is the current Secretary General of South Asian Regional Association of Dermatology, Venereology and Leprology. Indira has been a keen health communicator both on mainstream media and social media. In addition to her pet subject leprosy, she has been involved in taking messages of safe cosmetic practices across to the public and authored a book on skin care titled Penuma Ruwa Saha Suwatawa. She was a passionate painter in her school days, but now, though it had been forgotten, she practices crochet and photography as diversions from work. Married to Mahesh Adhikaram, and she is the mother of Devni and Yasit. On a personal note, I have been a silent admirer of Indira for her untiring and persevering efforts on educating public on leprosy and also on safe and unsafe cosmetic practices. Today, I present Dr. Indira Padmapani Kahavita and invite her to accept the Oration Medal and deliver the CG Uragoda Oration for 2024.
Thank you, Dr. Anand Vijay Vikrama. Good evening, everybody. Dr. Anand Vijay Vikrama, President and the Council and past Presidents of Sri Lanka Medical Association, distinguished guests, my dear teachers, colleagues, and friends. Can I have the slides, please? Christopher Gunapala Uragoda was born on the 22nd September 1928 as the youngest son of surveyor Dr. N.F.D.S. Uragoda and Mrs. Lena Uragoda in Hikkadua. Having received his secondary education at Richmond and Mahinda Colleges in Galle and Ananda College, Colombo, he entered the Colombo Medical College in 1948. Graduating in 1953, he was posted as the DMO at Pallebadda in the Ratnapura district. Having battled a few months with malaria at Pallebadda, he was transferred to the Colombo General Hospital, where the foundation for his future career in respiratory medicine was laid under the eminent doctors A.T.S. Paul and Dr. J.R. Wilson. In 1959, Dr. Uragoda left to the UK to specialize in respiratory medicine. On his return in 1962, he was posted as physician to the chest clinic in Kandy, where he worked for 11 years and was elected as president of the Kandy Society of Medicine in 1971. In 1973, he took over the work of the chest clinics Colombo and Valisara. He had research interests in many areas, the most notable being tuberculosis and occupational lung disease, and has published widely in national and international journals. He has held many prestigious positions, including President SLMA, President Royal Asiatic Society, and editor Ceylon Medical Journal. In 1985, he joined the Faculty of Occupational Medicine of the Royal College of Physicians of London. He had also received many awards, including the Guinness Award of the Commonwealth Science, S.C. Obesekara Award, Peter Pillay Award, and the Sarvodaya Award. The government of Sri Lanka awarded him the title Deshabandu. In addition to being a physician par excellence, he was a keen enthusiast in history, folklore, and wildlife. He has written many books in these areas, including A History of Medicine in Sri Lanka from the earliest time to 1948, Wildlife Conservation in Sri Lanka, Traditions of Sri Lanka, Little Known Wonders of Sri Lanka, and A History of Sri Lankan Elephants. His publication, Bibliography of Medical Publications Relating to Sri Lanka, was extremely useful in locating the early work on leprosy. He had the rare honor of 2 prestigious orations being named after him by the SLMA and the College of Chest Physicians while still alive. Dr. Uragoda was married to Padma Rambukputta and sired 4 children, Dr. Lalit, Neluka, Diyanti, and Dishana, and was blessed with several grandchildren. He passed away on the 28th March 2020 at the age of 91. The history of history of leprosy in Sri Lanka. My topic is the history of leprosy in Sri Lanka, a saga of 3 millennia. The history of leprosy in Sri Lanka dates back to the history of the country itself. At the outset, I would like to mention the terminology that would be used in the presentation. The words leper and asylum are not used in today's context and are considered discriminating terms. But I will be using these 2 terms for 2 reasons. The words are necessary in the historical context, and they give us an idea what a person had to go through in those dark times. For ease of discussion, I would like to stick to this arbitrary division of ancient times, the colonial period, the post-independence era, and the post-integration era. The search on literature on leprosy is not possible without an understanding of the nomenclature over time. Even though leprosy is called Laduru in Sinhala, the ancient word for leprosy in the Sinhala literature was Kushtaroga. This was the practice in many of the Indian dialects too. The word leprosy is derived from the Portuguese word lazaro, meaning leper. The word has origins in paper, since the leprosy lesions with peeling of skin resemble crumbling paper. The words Laduru and Lasuru have been used in the 19th century Ceylon. Many medical books, starting from Sarata Sangrahaya by King Buddhadasa in the 5th century, have been written in ancient Lanka. Out of these, we will focus on 3 books, Sarata Sangrahaya, Besaja Manjusava, and Yogarnavaya, as they give quite fascinating descriptions of Kushta. King Buddhadasa describes 7 types of Mahakushta and 11 Chula Kushta. Pundarika Kushta and Sidma Kushta belong to Mahakushta, and Eka Kushta of the Chula Kushta group resemble different presentations of leprosy. The modes of spread described in the Sarata Sangrahaya are remarkably modern. Yogarnavaya describes 7 types of Mahakushta and 11 Chula Kushta. Yogarnavaya describes 18 varieties of Kushta with 10 severe types and 8 types amenable to treatment. Sushruta Sanhita, the ancient Ayurvedic text, describes 18 varieties with a slightly different classification. Even though individual types may be considered non-specific, some of the types taken together describes the spectrum of leprosy quite accurately. Besaja Manjusava gives even better descriptions, with mention of neuropathic lesions leading to ulceration and disability. Features of lepromatous leprosy are also given in great detail. Both the Sushruta and Charaka Sanhita give almost identical descriptions of Kushta Purva Rupa. The absence of sensation, absence of sweating, paresthesia, goosebumps, unusual pain in the wound, neuropathic pain, Ulcers that occur easily and last longer, and numbness of organs have been described as symptoms of Kushta. What better description is there of the symptomatology of leprosy can we give today? Charaka describes remedies for the types of Kushta with loss of sensation, considering all the descriptions given in this ancient medical literature. One can deduct that the word Kushta was an all-encompassing term used to include all skin eruptions, like the present-day word rash, and leprosy was definitely one of them. Since the etiology of leprosy was not known at the time, many assumptions were made. The concept of a curse or sins from a previous birth had been common to many countries. Bad habits, including food, were considered. And more details on food and leprosy will be discussed later. The idea of genetic transmission was often entertained. Sushruta Sanhita mentions that if the eggs and sperms get contaminated by Kushta, the offspring may get affected. The ancient Buddhist literature mentions the case of Suppabuddha the leper. Suppabuddha Kutti, who, having wandered into the Dhamsabha Mandapaya where Lord Buddha was preaching, gained enlightenment since the Buddha preached for him specifically. Later, after his untimely death, the Buddha had revealed to the disciples that his sin was calling a Pacheka Buddha a leper in one of his previous births. The evidence for presence of leprosy in ancient Sri Lanka are mostly circumstantial and based mostly on medical literature. But it can be safely assumed that the writers of these ancient chronicles would not be able to discuss a disease which they were not familiar with. The Mahavansha mentions that the surgeon King Buddhadasa treated a leper who used abusing language at him in the marketplace for his mentally unbalanced condition. I would like to draw your attention here to the beginning of the Sinhala race. The union of Suppa Devi and the lion, resulting in Singhabahu and Singhasivali, parents of Vijaya. The most plausible medical explanation for the lion would be a well-built young man with lepromatous leprosy, who had fled to the jungles due to his disease. The fact that the offspring of a person with leprosy were accepted at the royal court is evidence that othering or discriminating of leprosy was not in practice at that time. Kushtaraja Gala in Valigama has been established as the statue of an Avalokiteshwara Bodhisattva. Bodhisattva worship was practiced for relief from sickness. It is believed that this statue was worshipped by lepers and seafarers in the south, seeking relief from their illnesses. Bioarchaeological work in many parts of the world has shown that leprosy, together with syphilis and trachoma, is as old as humankind itself. Work in the Indus Valley has shown that persons affected were not treated differently or discriminated against in the early period. They were buried with the others in the same manner that unaffected persons would be treated. Burial sites from the later periods showed that the feet were removed from the bodies of those affected with leprosy before burial, probably with the hope that the affected extremities would not follow them into the afterlife. These were the times that people believed in taking your belongings to the next life. So obviously the affected feet, when left behind, would not haunt you in your next birth. This and the use of ash to purify the body and soul represent genuine attempts to prevent those affected from being victims in the next birth rather than being treated differently or ostracized. Stigma and discrimination started much later, when the Vedas of later times considered leprosy as a condition to be avoided in marriage. The belief that leprosy was caused due to past sins may have led to this discrimination. Even though there is little documentation from the times of the Portuguese, we can safely assume that the disease was prevalent even then. What I am going to describe in the next few slides is based on the painstaking work of Professor Colvin Gunaratne in the early 1970s, going through numerous documents and getting them translated from archaic Dutch. The sources are threefold: the records of the Dutch Political Council, memoirs of the governors and other officials, and placards or directives, which describe the disease and its prevalence and the measures taken to prevent people from getting it. The earliest records of leprosy appear during the third decade of the Dutch rule. The presence of leprosy among both locals and Europeans started ringing alarm bells. They were mostly concerned about the close association of those affected with the apparently healthy public. In 1693, it was decided to request the authorities for funds to establish a leper asylum and to explore the possibility of segregating those affected as a measure of preventing spread of the disease. A panel of experts was appointed and entrusted with the task of conducting a comprehensive census within a stipulated period. No stone was to be left unturned. No person, irrespective of race or status, was to be spared. The fate of those diagnosed as a person affected was banishment to India. More patients were being identified, some of very high status. They were becoming a burden to the rulers, and need for a leprosarium was being felt intensely. By 1703, authority was given by the Supreme Indian Government and officers were appointed to identify a site. The work got delayed due to disputes about a site. A suitable site in Negombo had to be abandoned due to the protest of the local inhabitants. After much debate, the present site at Handala was identified and the work began. The work began during the period of Governor Cornelius John Simmons. Soon, the expenditure exceeded the estimates, and it was evident that the survey and the estimates were not accurate. The leper asylum was opened in 1708 by the governor Hendrik Becker. He had tried to mitigate the losses made in the construction by demolishing some of the buildings and selling the materials thus salvaged. A good example of an administrative nightmare. I will now take you through a brief history of Handala Leper Asylum, later Leprosy Hospital, Handala. The hospital was manned by qualified doctors from the very beginning. In fact, the first LMS Ceylon graduate of the Calcutta Medical College, Dr. L.H. Mayer, served the hospital for over 25 years in the latter part of the 19th century. The medical officers assigned to the care of leprosy received special training and carried out the treatments accepted in their times. There were numerous publications by these eminent personalities, and Dr. D. Simon was honored with OBE in 1951 for his services to leprosy. The nursing care was mostly in the hands of missionary sisters who continued their good work until 1964, when the government nursing staff took over. Here you see the staff. Here you see the staff comprising of the doctors and religious sisters together with some of the patients. The portraits adorning the wall of fame at Handala are of several medical superintendents who had served the institution over more than 100 years. All of them left an indelible mark in the history of leprosy in Sri Lanka. The hospital houses some invaluable artifacts. Among them are the first electric washing machine, the funeral carts that carried the dead to their final place of rest, and the old notice board carrying the daily statistics with the old name of the hospital on top. This group photograph was taken when the last batch of nuns left the hospital in 1964. Here you see the old admission book with the carefully written entries giving a history of those who entered the gates never to leave for home. In 1967, the inmates of the Handala Leprosy Hospital enacted a drama called Heladiva Purangana. The then young boy in the photograph kindly consented to be photographed together with some of the present day staff. In 2008, celebrations were held to commemorate the 300th anniversary of the Leprosy Hospital, with a stamp being released. Here are some photographs from the well-maintained buildings of the hospital that house the 25 inmates of today. The typical Dutch architecture of these historical buildings is clearly visible. Most of the old buildings are now in a state of dilapidation. Contrary to popular belief, Handala is not the first Dutch hospital. That distinction goes to the five-winged Dutch hospital in Colombo Fort, which now functions as a luxury shopping arcade. The highlights of the British era with regards to leprosy are the Lepers Ordinance and the establishment of the second leprosy asylum in Manthew of Batticaloa. There are very few records about leprosy during the early British period. I will summarize the few scientific publications. This article by Dr. J. Kinnes from 1842 describes leprosy of the joints in inmates of Handala in great detail. In 1862, the Royal College of Physicians, on the invitation of the Colonial Secretary, formulated a 5-member expert committee to study leprosy in detail with regards to its mode of spread, clinical features, and the treatment options. Ceylon was one of the respondents, with Dr. John Davy, Inspector General of Army Hospitals, giving details of patients he had seen in 1816. The 1864 report of the RCP was influential in shaping the rules and regulations on leper asylums and to guide treatment according to the then available evidence. The report carried these monographs of patients, Ceylonese patients affected by leprosy. The work by Dr. Mayer in the late 19th century has been commended highly. Around the same time, Dr. Heinsberg described a series of 1,700 patients who had been inmates of Handala since 1863. This paper is a rich source of information about the clinico-epidemiological factors of these patients as well as their family history. These were the times immediately following the discovery of the leprosy bacillus by Armer Hansen in 1873. The infective theory was not accepted widely, and we see Dr. Heinsberg presenting facts about the possibility of heredity in the causation of leprosy. One important factor here is that a good number of deaths were due to tuberculosis. The Ceylon Administrative Report served as an important source of information about leprosy. In 1895, Dr. Mayer in his report mentions that segregation was voluntary and that it was the practice in the region, including India. About 4 years later, he raises his concerns about the voluntary segregation as there were patients who had being in and out of the hospital at their discretion, with the possibility of spreading the disease in the community. In 1897, the first International Leprosy Conference was held in Berlin, in which Hansen made strong representation as to the usefulness of segregation. Even though the topic was hotly debated, in the absence of India, the main stakeholder, recommendations were made to bring legislation for segregation. The Lepers Ordinance number 4 of 1901 resulted from these recommendations. The ordinance contains 37 sections covering all aspects, and we will only look at the most important points. The minister had the authority to order segregation. With the existing hospital coming under the ordinance, all citizens were given the responsibility of reporting to the authorities if they knew of a person affected. Provisions were made. A hefty fine of 50 rupees in 1901 was the penalty for failure to notify. Provisions were made to ensure that the diagnosis was accurate, and the final authority to segregate lay in the hands of Director Health. Home quarantine was also allowed, considering the limited space available at the lepers hospital. Here you see the examination form with 2 doctors certifying the diagnosis. Since leprosy was considered an important health problem, the census reports collected and published data about the numbers of persons under asylum care and their employability if they were discharged. An interesting piece of information from this era is the fish theory of leprosy, suggested and fiercely defended by the legendary Dr. Jonathan Hutchinson. He even wrote a book in 1906 named On Leprosy and Fish Eating. This theory was discussed in Ceylon, where a large number affected were either from the coastal areas or were fishermen. The logistic nightmare of transporting leprosy patients from the east, where there were a considerable number of patients even then, paved the way for a second leprosy hospital in the east. A fairly thick collection of documents from a pending file at the National Archives gives the story of Mantiu in great detail. The preparations, the quest for a suitable location, the opposition from local inhabitants, the steps taken to ensure that a hospital suitable for the patients was built are all there in these files. The proclamation by the governor, William Henry Manning, was made on the 29th November 1921. Here are some pictures from old publications depicting the map of Mantiu and some patients from the Mantiu hospital. The more recent documents from Mantiu show the added responsibility of maintaining a boat service to reach the island. Miss Kumuduni Piris, the daughter of Dr. Nicholas Piris, MOIC of Mantiu in the 1950s, told me that her father named the boats Sirima, Vimala and Kumuduni. In 1996, at the height of the civil unrest, it was decided to close the hospital and transfer the patients to Handala. 38 patients came to Handala, 3 left for home, and 2 patients did not want to leave Mantiu. These patients are still there, with the hospital being under the management of Teaching Hospital Batticaloa. This is the status of Mantiu today. These old administration reports bear evidence that the leprosy hospital was regarded such an important institution that the governor himself paid regular visits. By the late 1920s, there were in excess of 700 inmates in the 2 hospitals. In 1932, Dr. Robert Cochrane, renowned leprologist, visited the island to conduct a survey in the western and the eastern provinces. His findings and recommendations are valid even in today's context. He has paid special attention to the presence of leprosy in children and concluded that the disease is mild in children and emphasizes on the importance of continuing their education. He has laid down recommendations on disease control activities as well as cases that need treatment. The reports of his two visits in 1932 and 1936 that helped in shaping the leprosy control in then Ceylon are available at the Sri Lanka Medical Library. Dr. Frank Bartholomeus, medical superintendent of Handela, in a talk before the Dutch Burger Union in 1943, mentions that there are about 1,100 patients within the two hospitals, while about 1,000 more are on home quarantine. I believe it is time for us to discuss the early treatment of leprosy. The first mention of treatment at Handela in this administration report of 1877 mentions two oils, Gurjun oil and Shawl Mugra oil. The keen doctor, probably Dr. Mayer, mentions local alternatives too. Shawl Mugra oil, extracted from the plant Hydnocarpus, was used as an external preparation, oral drug, as well as injections. The addition of camphor and later esterification, pioneered by Alice Ball, the first African American female to become a chemistry graduate, made the injections better tolerated. ECCO was the mainstay of therapy at the Ceylonese leprosy hospitals in the 1920s and the 1930s. This 1924 report by the doctors from Handela showed that the treatment was not very effective in about 50% of the patients. Only those patients consenting for treatment were given the concoction, and some developed severe adverse effects. Even in the 1940s, ECCO or Shawl Mugra oil were the mainstay of treatment. This is the first paper from Ceylon that discusses the treatment of lepra reactions, that too with adrenaline. This advertisement for sulfatrone for leprosy appeared opposite an article on leprosy in the December 1933 issue of the Lancet. The post-independence era showed the use of early sulfones in the treatment. Sulfatrone was the first sulfone, with thiosemicarbazone as an alternative in patients with lepromatous leprosy who could not tolerate sulfones. After dapsone was introduced in the 1950s, it was used as monotherapy in the 1960s. It was used as monotherapy for very long periods. I have recently seen some patients who had received dapsone monotherapy in the 1960s who still remain free of the bacillus. In 1952, a leprosy colony was established in Uragasmanghandia to house able-bodied patients who could live there and receive treatment while being engaged in useful livelihoods. Their weaving mills produced materials for use in all three leprosy hospitals. This place, which was underutilized, faced an untimely death in 1963. In the early British era, leprosy control activities were carried out from the leprosy hospital itself. Later, most of the public health work was coordinated from the Central Leprosy Clinic in Maradana. In the 1940s, the clinic mainly functioned as a field clinic, coordinating the activities of the peripheral clinics. In 1957, it was decided to convert the clinic into a treatment center. thus making the shift from preventive to the curative side. The location of the central clinic has changed several times. Since the clinic moved to the OPD of the Colombo General Hospital, Room 21 has had its own identity, which was unfortunately lost when the clinic had to be shifted due to the demolition of the old OPD building. In keeping with the establishment of vertical campaigns for control of communicable diseases, the anti-leprosy campaign was established in 1954. The administration of the 4 main centers and carrying out numerous disease control activities were under the purview of the campaign. In 1959, an island-wide survey was carried out by the anti-leprosy campaign. There were almost 3,500 registered cases in total, while 881 were within the institutions. 330 plus new cases were detected and put on dapsone monotherapy. From the statistics for the 1950s, you can see that on average 300 new cases were detected each year. Even with the relatively smaller population, this figure is not comparable to the numbers of cases that are detected at present. I was one of the school children screened for leprosy in the late 1970s. During this time, work was being carried out to identify potential mycobacterial antigens for a leprosy vaccine. This paper, looking at the tuberculin and leprosy response in Sri Lankan and Indian children, is evidence for Sri Lanka's involvement in research as early as the 1980s. Here you see my guru in leprosy, Professor Diana Lockwood, performing skin tests on Sri Lankan children. In addition to the lepers ordinance, which has become superfluous today, there are several legislations regarding leprosy. Initial steps have been taken to change some of these laws, like the lepers ordinance and the establishment code. The Muslim law of 1806, which has not been changed recently, has considered leprosy as grounds for divorce, and in 1949, a lady was granted divorce in view of leprosy in her husband. In the sessional papers of 1959, a recommendation is made to change this law. Leprosy has evolved from a dreaded disease with a threat of segregation into a bacterial infection that can be completely cured, thanks to the multidrug therapy or MDT. With the discovery of rifampicin and clofazimine in the 1960s and 70s, and confirmation of their efficacy against Mycobacterium leprae, the World Health Organization formed a working group to formulate a treatment regimen. The aim was to find a regimen that could be feasible to use under field conditions and economical enough to treat the estimated population of 16 million persons living with leprosy worldwide. Therefore, MDT does not have an evidence base as of today, but has stood the test of time by bringing relief to millions of patients for over 40 years. Sri Lanka was one of the first countries in Asia to provide MDT to all patients with leprosy. The introduction of an efficacious and safe treatment that had proven bactericidal effects gave new hope for leprosy control activities. In this very recent paper by Dr. Supun Vijay Singha, you can see how the number of new cases and the new case detection per 100,000 population fluctuated since 1960. Here you can see the new case detection showing a gradual rise after introduction of MDT. With hope of a cure being available, finding of more cases within the community by improving awareness became very important. In this collection from the 1980s, you will see the giants of leprosy like Dr. Dayamal Devapura, Dr. Padmini Gunawardena, and Dr. Sunil Settinayaka. And leading dermatologists like Dr. D.N. Athukorala, Dr. W.D.H. Pereira, and Dr. Lakshman Ranasinghe getting together with donors from Swiss Emmaus and ministry officials, Dr. Joe Fernando and Dr. George Fernando, in planning a strategy to improve awareness. The fruits of their enterprises are seen in the next slides. In the late 1980s, the teledrama Alla Langa Walawwa brought leprosy to the limelight. Written by an eminent neurologist, it contained an accurate portrayal of leprosy. But by depicting leprosy as a disease to be kept secret, it didn't help in giving hope to the public. Around this time, the anti-leprosy campaign embarked on a massive project of public awareness. Every possible type of media carried messages of clinical features and the fact that leprosy is curable. Irapaya, a teledrama by Mr. Chandraratna Mapitigama, was the culmination of these events. With a young and innocent-looking Samitha Mudunkotua playing the lead, this became an instant hit and took the positive message about leprosy to many across the country. With the success of the social marketing campaign, the new case detection improved with an almost threefold increase in 1990. As expected, the new case detection remained high for a few years and then came down to a plateau, which has remained since then. Looking at the trend over 60 years, thanks to Dr. Supun, who is in the audience, the most striking feature here is that there are two periods with low and high case detection. The low case detection in the pre-MDT time improved, and case detection remained high in the post-social marketing era. This bears testimony to the success of the awareness campaign. In 1995, Sri Lanka was declared a country achieving the WHO's target of elimination of leprosy as a public health problem. This highly technical point of elimination as a public health problem was understood by the general public and most of the healthcare workers as no leprosy or total elimination. This misconception of elimination has been a major obstacle for leprosy awareness and control in Sri Lanka. The social marketing campaign and its results, as well as the process of elimination and integration of leprosy into general health services in 2001, have been discussed at length in several publications. The initial aim of integration was to hand over leprosy care to institutions closer to home. With a wide availability of dermatologists throughout the country and the trend to refer the suspected patients for confirmation of the diagnosis, it was later evident that it was the most feasible way of managing patients would be to let them be managed in dermatology units island-wide. At present, all patients receive comprehensive leprosy care under the supervision of consultant dermatologists. Not only in disease control, clinical leprosy too has had significant contributions from Sri Lankan dermatologists. The tap sign and the use of a folded paper for testing sensation were introduced by Professor Prasad Kumarasinghe, a dermatologist of Sri Lankan origin. Sri Lanka College of Dermatologists published the clinical guidelines in 2010 and 2013. These have been revised and incorporated into one guideline and will be republished shortly. This publication, a joint effort by the SLMA and the Sri Lanka College of Dermatologists, with many dermatologists contributing with cases, was launched in 2015. In addition to the milestones so far discussed, the declaration of leprosy as a notifiable disease in 2013 was a step taken to streamline contact examination and to ensure treatment compliance. With a decline in case detection following the global pandemic, the need for improved case detection was felt badly. A second social marketing campaign using mainstream and social media began in 2022. This chart depicting both the new case detection and the child rates together shows that the detection of child cases has increased while the new case detection in general declined. But the fact that visible disability among children with leprosy in Sri Lanka is less than 1% bears testimony to the fact that children with leprosy in Sri Lanka are being detected early compared to adults. The new targets for leprosy elimination by the WHO include achieving a zero child rate. Being a country with a child rate of 10%, Sri Lanka will not be able to achieve these targets by 2030. Is achieving a zero leprosy targets an elusive target for Sri Lanka? These serial maps for Badulla, a low endemic district, tell us otherwise. The red areas 20 years ago have now almost become green, telling us that it is possible to bring down the child cases. Sri Lanka is the first country to use the leprosy elimination monitoring tool and develop maps of the entire country under programmatic conditions. These maps from the western, eastern, and the northern provinces show us clearly where our problems lie and how we should divert our resources in each area. From this colorless map of elimination leprosy at national level, now we have progressed to a map depicting the risk according to a traffic light model. This work can be made even more meaningful by developing spot maps using GIS technology. We are hopeful that with such targeted action, Sri Lanka will become a country free of leprosy within our lifetime. With that hope, I would like to conclude this oration by expressing my gratitude to many. 3 individuals, all giants in the field of medicine, deserve a special word of thanks. Professor Colvin Gunaratne for the comprehensive work on the history of leprosy. Dr. Lakshman Ranasinghe, who is in the audience today, for initiating the thought of a book on the history of leprosy and compiling the initial list of references, which I have built upon. And Dr. Philip Veerasingham for suggesting that I delve more into the history in addition to my clinical work in leprosy. My teams from District General Hospital Polonnaruwa, Base Hospital Karavanalla, Homagama and the Anti-Leprosy Campaign deserve a special word of thanks. The directors of the Anti-Leprosy Campaign and consultant community physicians of the Anti-Leprosy Campaign have been very supportive to maintain a cordial relationship between clinicians and public health personnel. I'm grateful to all my teachers from school and medical school, some of whom are in the audience, for their guidance. There are some who need special mention. Dr. D.N. Athukorala, who initiated me to the wonders of dermatology, consultants of University Medical Unit in Obstetrics and Gynecology, Colombo, headed by Professor Harsha Seneviratne, and Dr. W.K. Balasurya, under whom I did internship. Dr. Mahinda Gunawardena, Dr. Sarath Gamnidi Silva, and Dr. Ganga Sirimanna, my postgraduate trainers in dermatology and medicine, and Professor Diana Lockwood, who introduced me to the world of leprosy. My unnamed friend, who was the bridge between me and Professor Lockwood, needs a special word of thanks. The preparation for this oration was no trivial task. My sincere gratitude goes to Dr. Saroja Vettasinghe former Director General of the National Archives, and Ms. H.M. Deepani, and the friendly staff of the National Archives, the staff of the Sri Lanka Medical Library, Professor Raj Somadeva, and many others who supported in finding the old documents and photographs. The SLMA team, the President and the Council of SSCD, and Mr. Zalmi were there behind me throughout. Mr. Tilan and Mr. Nadish and the ISC's pharma team deserve a special word of thanks for their sponsorship. My dear departed parents and two aunts made endless sacrifices to enable me to shine in the academic world. I hope that their blessings would be with me always. And last but not least, thank you Mahesh, Devni and Yasit for tolerating my tantrums and long absences during the struggles to balance work and family. Finally, a very good night to all of you who joined us today, both physically and virtually, to go down the memory lane of leprosy. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, with that, we have reached the end of this evening's proceedings. Congratulations, Dr. Kahawita, and thank you very much for a riveting and thorough history of leprosy, covering not only treatment and the way forward, but also administration and history that we had not even thought of. Thank you once again.